welcome back to the U.S. Navy History Podcast. I am Dale, and I am joined by Christoph. Hey,
Hey,
buddy.
good to be here. Thank you very much for having me again.
Well, of course. I mean, what would I do without you?
You don't want me to answer that. I mean,
No, you don't. You don't want to put yourself in
right.
that position.
I think we have a Fifth Amendment in America. And I think it should apply to this podcast too, not just the government. You know what I'm saying?
I know what you're saying, but that's denied.
There you go. You're using it. Oh, wait, no, you're denying my ability to use it, not denying your ability to. Okay. All right. Well,
Yep.
we are a Constitution-free zone here on the podcast. Woo! International waters.
Yes. No rules. All right, let's get back into our Pearl Harbor discussion, shall we?
Let's.
All right, let's get underway. So, let's talk a little bit about the Japanese submarines. The fleet submarines, the I-16, 18, 20, 22, and 24, both had on them a Type A midget submarine that they wanted to transport to Oahu. They left the Kure Naval District on November 25th of 1941, and on December 6th, they came to within 10 nautical miles to the mouth of Pearl Harbor. Then they launched their midget subs at around 0100 on December 7th. At 0342, the minesweeper Condor spotted one of the midget submarines' periscopes southwest of the entrance to Pearl Harbor, right next to one of their buoys, and they alerted the destroyer, the USS Ward. They lost track of that one. They think that probably went back into the harbor itself. But the Ward did sink another midget submarine at 0637. This was officially the first American shots in the Pacific Theater.
I did not know that. That's interesting.
Yeah. A midget submarine on the north side of Ford Island missed a seaplane tender, the Curtis, with one of her torpedoes, and then with her second one missed the destroyer Monahan. And then the Monahan was like, I don't like that, I'm sinking you.
It's good to have convictions.
Which they did at 0843. A third midget submarine grounded twice. This was the HA-19. Once outside the harbor entrance and again on the east side of Oahu, where they captured it on December 8th. And that's why we know which one it was.
I was going to say, yeah, that makes sense.
The guy who ran it, Ensign Kuzu Sakamaki, swam ashore and was captured by the Hawaiian National Guard, Corporal David Akui. And this ensign became the first Japanese prisoner of war.
From what I know about Japanese battle mentality, he was the first to dishonor his country.
Yes.
At least, well, in the conflict.
In the Japanese 1942 mentality.
Yeah, exactly. Not the current one, just in that snapshot of time.
Yes. A fourth midget submarine had been damaged by a depth charge attack and was abandoned by its crew before it could fire its torpedoes.
Nice.
It was found outside the harbor in 1960.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. The Japanese forces received a radio message from a midget submarine at 0041 on December 8th, claiming to have damaged one or more large ships inside Pearl Harbor. That's highly doubtful. So the Hawaii Undersea Research Laboratory sent submersibles and found the wreck of a fifth midget submarine laying in 3 parts outside of Pearl Harbor. They found it in 1992, went back in 2000 and 2001. The wreck was actually in a debris field where surplus American equipment had been
Yeah.
dumped after the war.
Nice.
The surplus did include vehicles and
Oh
landing
my
craft, just
gosh.
FYI. Yeah, that is not good for the ocean.
Well, was there any coral on there? Maybe there was a side benefit.
You'd have to ask the research
Research
laboratory.
laboratory. I will. Let me see if I can jot down their number and ask them about that.
They did find that both of its torpedoes were missing, which, with a report of 2 torpedoes fired at the light cruiser St. Louis, coincided that this was
Oh
probably
wow.
the
Yeah,
one.
that makes sense.
Uh, there is dispute over the official change of events. The torpedo, quote unquote, that the St. Louis saw was also reportedly a minesweeper float being towed by the destroyer Boggs. It could have been a torpedo. It could have been a minesweeper float.
So, what is a minesweeper float? That is not a combination of terms I've heard connected. Minesweeper is a ship, right? And a float is a short for flotilla or a thing you use in the pool on a nice sunny day or something that is ice cream and root beer combined that is frothy and delicious. None of these fit in my mind. Can you help me understand?
I can. This is a device used in naval minesweeping operations. It's designed to be towed behind a minesweeper and helps in cutting the mooring
Oh,
cables of
okay.
mines, causing them to float to the surface, where they can then be
Okay.
disarmed or
I
destroyed.
see. So, okay. Well, thank you for that. You know what? Believe in yourself. I do understand it now. I know that it was a high mountain to climb, but you made it.
I just had to wait for you to shut up.
Well, that's another high mountain that you need to climb as well.
Yes, that is a very high mountain.
So-
There is some naval historians that theorize that a photo taken by a Japanese naval aviator of Battleship Road during this attack, that it shows the 5th midget submarine firing a torpedo at West Virginia and another at Oklahoma.
Wow.
Now, these torpedoes were twice the size of the aerial torpedoes, so it is possible that both torpedoes did contribute to the sinkings of both of these ships. Let's see. So, now, the attack took place, as everybody knows, before any formal declaration of war was made by Japan. But Admiral Yamamoto was not intending to do that. His original plan was that the attack would not commence until 30 minutes after Japan had informed the U.S. that peace negotiations were at an end. But the attack happened before they could deliver the message. Tokyo transmitted the 5,000 word notification in 2 blocks to the Japanese embassy in Washington. Transcribing this message took a very long time because he wasn't able to deliver it until 1300.
Oh, that's embarrassing. You know, this seems like a very coordinated attack. Like if you think about when the ships left Japan and all the different ships that were involved in how they attacked and the different waves of planes and everything very coordinated, very well thought out. It seems like you could say, "Hey, embassy, we're going to send you this a week ahead of time, like when the ships are leaving, but don't deliver it until this time."
So, But you know how time zones work. So 1300, if they would have did it at 1200 instead, it would have coincided with the attack.
That is that's interesting. And so do we know how quickly Washington was notified of the attack? Because this is a massive attack, and I'm sure they telephoned somebody. So, in any event, I'm sure the ambassador was like, "Why are you wasting my time with this? You just attacked." And I think there's a scene in Tora 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 that reflects that.
Yeah. I mean, it will take time to notify anybody of the attack, especially while it's
Right.
happening, because somebody's not going to be there while they're being shot at and say, "Hey, I got to go
Right.
call
Battle
Washington real
station's
quick. You guys
full.
hold on."
Not get off the phone. I guess unless you're
Yeah.
ordered to do so, that would be something.
So here's the thing. American code breakers had already deciphered and translated most of the message hours before it was supposed to be delivered. The final part of the message is sometimes described as a declaration of war, and it was viewed by a number of senior American government officials and military officials as a very strong indicator negotiations were likely to be terminated and that war might break out at any time. The message neither declared war or severed diplomatic relations. So even if they wanted to say, "Hey guys, we're at war now," they didn't write it very
Well, I think
well.
it's a face-saving statement, right? It's like, "Hey, we're not gonna discuss peace." And so they're not, deceiving America. They're not trying to goad them into thinking that, "Oh, yeah, we're all about pursuing peace." It's like, "No, we're done with that." And then you still have the element of surprise because 'cause you're not outright declaring war, like, diplomatically,
Yeah,
but you certainly are with the attack. So,
yeah, and that's why Americans were like, "Well, we're at war now."
it's true.
A declaration of war was printed on the front page of Japan's newspapers that evening, edition of December 8th, but not delivered to the American government officially until the day after the attack. De- December 8th evening
Oh, yeah,
in
yeah. I
Japan
it's
is
all weird because of the
late
time zones.
December
I get
7th.
you.
Yeah.
I've had to during the course of my employment, had to be on conference calls with folks in, like, Taiwan or various other places in that region, and it's a huge difference.
So historians have argued for decades that the Japanese attacked without first formally breaking diplomatic relations only because of accidents and bumbling that delayed the delivery of a document hinting, quote unquote, hinting at war to Washington. In 99, the professor of law and international relations at the International Christian University in Tokyo, a guy named Takio Uguchi, he found documents that pointed to a vigorous debate inside the government over how, or even if they were going to notify Washington of Japan's intention of breaking off negotiations and starting a war, including a December 7th entry in the war diary saying, quote, "Our deceptive diplomacy is steadily proceeding toward success." Uguchi said that the diary shows that the Army and Navy did not want to give any prior declaration of war, or indeed prior notice, even of the termination of negotiations. And obviously, they
Yep.
got their way.
I I I guess so, hindsight being what it is, and living in an age where we have freedom of information requests and the internet that can distribute things far and wide, why you would ever write down the phrase, "Yeah, our deceptive diplomacy's working out."
Well, because they thought they were
Well,
going to
yeah,
win.
and
So they wanted to keep it as a historical record.
I can understand that. It does it yeah, I don't know. You can't write that in code or something? I don't know.
Yeah.
I guess it took until the 90s for somebody to find it, so
Uh, even if that, even if the Japanese were able to get to the message before the attack began, it really would not have constituted either a formal break of diplomatic relations or a declaration of war because of the last two
yeah.
paragraphs. I have
Oh,
those if you
yeah.
want them.
I would like them. Wait, are they lengthy? Okay. Then yes, I want them.
Thus, the earnest hope of the Japanese government to adjust Japanese American relations and to preserve and promote the peace of the Pacific through cooperation with the American government has finally been lost. The Japanese government regrets to have to notify hereby the American government that in view of the attitude of the American government, it cannot but consider that it is impossible to reach an agreement through further negotiations.
Yeah, that's it seemed
All that says is we're at an
right.
impasse.
Well, it says that hey, peace negotiations aren't going to settle this. Wink, wink. It's going to have to be settled somehow differently.
It doesn't even say any of that.
I'm reading
It's
between the
just saying that
lines with the benefit of history that I can access.
yeah. So the U.S. Naval Intelligence, they were alarmed because they had the message before Washington
Right.
did. They were like, this is weird because this says that, and then the guy delivers it at 1300. Let's go ahead and talk to Pearl and let them know that things might go down.
That's sensible.
But of course, communication problems and 1942
Yeah.
communication, not the
Yeah.
best. Yeah, they couldn't get warning out there
You
before
know,
the
that
attack.
actually answers a question I had earlier. Why would you wait until the last minute to communicate a message like that if the timing is urgent? Well, here's your answer. If it's going to get cracked by military intelligence and then you have to face a higher alerted, base.
That's fair.
Yeah. What do you mean fair?
It's fair to face a higher
Yeah,
alerted
why would you
base
want a fair
instead of
fight?
slaughtering thousands or hundreds of thousands of military personnel, but hundreds of civilians too.
Right. I think um the objective was military, like was battleships. We had discussed that last time. The capital ships.
Yeah.
And just when they're in port, I'm sure there's a lot of different folks on the ship trying to get it back to where it needs to be. Uh and I don't know. I think after World War One, the total war mentality became more dominant, and I don't know if it was more so in Japan or not. I'm not as knowledgeable about their attitudes there, but I don't think they cared.
No, no, of course not. Still not fair.
Yeah, that's surprise attacks are all about. Yeah, surprise, this is going to be really effective.
All right, so it's time to get into the
Oh
attack
man.
itself. So the first wave, this attack consisted of 183 airplanes, led by a guy named Commander Mitsu Fuchida. And these planes were launched north of Oahu. So 6 of these planes failed to launch because of technical difficulties, which, you know, yay, 6 less,
Yeah,
but still,
still a high number of
that's a
planes
lot.
that were. Eesh.
So the first wave included 3 groups. The first group, which was to target the battleships and aircraft carriers, were 49 Kate bombers armed with 800-kilogram armor-piercing bombs, 40 B-5N bombers armed with Type 91 torpedoes, The second group, whose targets were Ford Island and Wheeler Field, consisted of 51 Val dive bombers armed with 550-pound general-purpose bombs. The third group, whose targets were aircraft at Ford Island, Hickam Field, Wheeler Field, Barbers Point, and Kanohi, was consisted of 43 Mitsubishi Zero fighters for air
Wait,
control
did you
and
say
strafing.
3? 43. Okay, I
43.
missed the. It's like, wow, that's a lot of confidence in those 3 guys.
Yeah. So the first wave approaches Oahu. It is detected, as we all know, by the U.S. Army's SCR 270 radar positioned at Opana Point near the island's northern tip. Thing is that this post had been in training mode for months and not yet operational. The operators, Privates George Elliott Jr. and Joseph Lockhart, reported a target to Private Joseph P. McDonald, who was stationed at Fort Shaffert's Intercept Center near Pearl Harbor. Lieutenant Kermit A. Taylor, who was newly assigned at the really understaffed Intercept Center, thought it was a scheduled arrival of 6 B-17 bombers from California. The Japanese planes were approaching from a direction that they thought that the bombers were supposed to be coming out of. It was only kind of like a couple of degrees difference. So he's like, okay, so air drift.
I wonder if that was part of the Japanese plan. You think that,
I don't think they could have known about the flight of
or
B-17s
not
coming
that
in.
specific flight, but if something was coming in from the mainland, which direction would they come from? And then mirroring that to just to give them that much more of an advantage.
They might have. I guess it really just depends on how well the spies on the island
Right.
were doing, and if they were able to figure that out and relay that to the Japanese government.
I wouldn't be surprised. Just I know we haven't necessarily talked about this, but when they were the Japanese scientists had discovered the jet stream and made those
Yeah.
balloon-based bombs that floated over to the United States. That was
Mhm.
incredible, I think. And so they had a lot of smart cookies trying to figure it out.
Well, thankfully, those balloon bombs weren't very
Right.
effective. So, Tyler did not get informed of the size of
Yeah,
the
no.
incoming aircraft, how many there were. Now, of course, radar in 1941 and now are miles
Right.
and miles apart, but you could still tell relatively the size of an air group coming in. And since there was only 6 B-17s, they're not going to make a huge of a blob as,
180. Yeah.
183 planes.
Whew. That was the first wave. That's crazy.
And because of security reasons, Tyler wasn't able to tell the operators of the 6 B-17s that were due, even though everybody
I
already
see.
knew it.
Yeah.
So as the wave approached Oahu, they encountered and shot down several American aircraft. At least one of these radioed in a warning, even though it was pretty incoherent. There are other warnings from ships off of the harbor entrance. These were being processed and awaiting confirmation when the air assault began at 0748. The first place to be attacked was Kanoho. A total of 353 Japanese planes reached Oahu in 2 of the waves. Because remember, the third one got
Right.
canceled. The torpedo bombers led the first wave, exploiting the first moments of surprise to attack the most important ship's present, which was the battleships. And then the dive bombers attacked the American air bases across Oahu, starting with Hickam Field, then Wheeler Field. Then the 171 planes in the second wave attacked the Army Air Force Field, Bellows Field, which was on the windward side of the island. And also they hit Ford Island. The Americans were able to put up a little bit of opposition from the air, with a handful of P-36 Hawks, P-40 Warhawks, and some SDB Dauntless dive bombers. In the first wave, about 8 of the 49 armor-piercing bombs hit their intended battleship targets. At least 2 of these bombs broke up on impact. Another detonated before penetrating an unarmored deck, and one of them was a dud. 13 of the 40 torpedoes hit battleships, while 4 hit other smaller vessels. The men on these ships awoke to sounds of alarms, bombs exploding, and gunfire, which, helped motivate them to get to general quarters.
I'm trying to think of what the most effective alarm sound would be, and it would be that.
Well, that's why general quarters alarms, when, you're alerted to go to your general quarter station, are distinctive.
Yeah, it's...
Yes,
Although the scientists that developed the typical alarm sound that was the most popular through the 80s and 90s of the red LED, you know what I'm saying? That's in the top 5.
A lot of ships have different GQ alarms, just depending on the ship. Some of them, are like whoop whoop whoop. The one on my boat was bong bong bong. So it just depends on the boat.
Is it the individual boat or the type of boat, or like what? Like if I'm serving on one vessel and I get transferred to a different vessel of the same type, would it have the same general quarters alarm?
I'm not sure. I only served on one boat.
Well, I will ask that to the listener. Let us know if you have experienced that. We'll go ahead and throw it in the podcast.
But of course, after the general quarters alert is sounded, there's always somebody coming over the 1MC, saying, general quarters, man your battle stations.
Yeah.
And giving all the instructions that need to be given.
I'm just trying to put myself in the mental space of a sailor that is waking up to this. And that's got to be... Yeah.
Terrifying.
Not quite panic, because training kicks in, right? And so you're just rushing to get to where you need to be. And then you see a sky filled with Japanese Zeros. You know what I mean?
And not just Zeros, but dive bombers, torpedo bombers, they had multiple classes of aircraft out there. Of course, American servicemen were caught unprepared for the attack. Ammunition lockers were locked, aircraft parked wingtip to wingtip, because they wanted to prevent sabotage, but just made them easier to hit all of them at once. Only about a quarter of the Navy's 5-inch 38s got into none of the Navy's 5-inch 38s got into the action. About a quarter of their machine guns got manned and operated, and only 4 of the 31 Army batteries got into action.
That is the advantage of surprise.
So even though the Americans were operating under a low alert status, they were able to respond effectively during the attack. For example, Ensign Joseph Tossing Jr., who was aboard the Nevada, commanded the ship's anti-aircraft guns and was severely wounded but remained at his post. The lieutenant commander, F.J. Thomas, was took command of the Nevada because the captain was not there and got her underway until they grounded her at 0910. The destroyer Iwin got underway with only 4 officers aboard, all of them ensigns, and none with more than a years of
Wow.
sea duty under their belts. Yeah. She operated for 36 hours at sea before her commanding officer was managed to get back on board. Another example was Captain Mervyn Bennon, who commanded the West Virginia, and he led his men until he was cut down by fragments from a bomb which hit the Tennessee, which was moored alongside them. So the second wave begins. It consisted of 171 planes. Four of them failed to launch because of technical difficulties, and it comprised of 3 groups. First group had 54 B-5Ns armed with 550-pound and 132-pound general-purpose bombs. They had 27 B-5Ns were to target the aircraft hangars on Kanoho and Ford Island and Barbers Point. The other 27 were to target hangars and aircraft on Hickam Field. The second group, whose target was the aircraft carriers and cruisers, was 78 D-3As armed with 550-pound general-purpose bombs. The third group, which was to target aircraft at Ford Island, Hickam Field, and Wheeler Field, Barbers Point, and Kanohi, were 35 Zeros for defense and strafing. The second wave was divided into 3 groups, one tasked to attack Kanoho, and the rest to attack Pearl Harbor. They arrived at the attack point and pretty much simultaneously from several directions. So that will bring us to casualties and damage. The attack lasted for 90
Wow.
minutes, an hour and a half.
For a sustained attack,
When
that
it was
is
over,
an eternity.
Yeah. And that was only 2 of the 3 planned waves. 2,008 sailors were killed, 710 wounded. 218 soldiers and airmen were killed, 364 wounded. 109 Marines are killed, 69 wounded. 68 civilians are killed, with 35 wounded. So in total, if you want to add up all those numbers, 2,403 Americans are dead,
Golly.
1,178 wounded. 18 ships are sunk or run aground.
Run aground? Sorry.
And, run aground.
I guess I assumed most ships were moored and weren't at sea or deployed, but it's probably just a mental misunderstanding that I'm experiencing, because you were mentioning how some of them were sinking submarines and doing other things. So
Also, you're in harbor and you're under attack. You want to get underway as soon as possible, so you're now a moving target.
That's true.
Some of these ships were
Oh,
able to get underway. We
right,
just
the one with the
described. Remember that
ensigns.
one with?
Yeah. Okay.
And the ones that were run aground were done on purpose to keep from sinking after being hit badly.
Okay. Sorry for the interruption. It's just there are elements of this attack that I've heard many times, and I understand some aspects, but details like that really kind of paint a broader picture that I'm like, oh, yeah, of course that would happen, or
Mhm.
why did that happen? Or so thanks for shedding a little bit more light on this.
Now, here's something else to blow your mind. All of the Americans killed and wounded during this attack were legally non-combatants.
Right, because there was no declaration of war.
Uh-huh.
So when you kill a, let's pull back from this conflict, but it'll apply. If you are representing a nation state of some sort, and your military attacks the military specifically, let's just narrow it in on that, of another nation, they're technically non-combatants until you declare war?
Yep.
Who in what situation would that make a difference? Like, is this post-war legal action or something, or
So technically, the Japanese committed 2,403 murders and 1,178 assaults with a deadly weapon.
okay. So if some high-ranking official were to step foot onto American soil, they could be charged with these things?
The commander, somebody would have been, or somebody would have been held responsible for this
Right.
attack, and they would have been tried at the end of the war for war crimes because of this. Remember, after the wars, there was a lot of
Yeah, for
tribunals,
sure.
war crime
I hear
tribunals.
them mostly about Germany.
I'm
You know what I mean? There's a lot of post-war sentencing of German war criminals. I don't hear it as much with Japan, even though this could.
well, that's because Germany gets most of the attention for
Right.
these things. But so one of the things that a lot of people don't know about is Section
Okay.
31.
What's that?
That was the Japanese medical experiments on human
Oh,
beings.
yes, yes, yes. Is it
Oh
731?
no, not Section 31. Like yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
731,
yeah.
something like that.
And yeah, they in Manchukuo and China, I think a lot of the people that they occupied were used for experimentation.
Yes, it hit the Japanese or it hit the Chinese hard with that human
Right.
experimentation. And yeah, a lot of those guys that were part of that project. War
Yeah, I could see
crimes.
that. I mean, that's crime against humanity, but I guess yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, non-combatants. Continue.
All right. So the of the American fatalities, nearly half of them were because of the explosion of the Arizona's Ford
Whoa,
magazine.
half. Oof.
Nearly half.
Well, still, it's a lot.
So one historian, Craig Nelson, wrote that the vast majority of the U.S. sailors killed at Pearl Harbor were junior enlisted personnel because the officers of the Navy all lived in houses on the naval bases. They got the uh, the housing
Hmm.
allotments, and the junior sailors were living on the boats.
Makes sense.
So pretty much all of the people who died in the direct line of the attack were very junior people.
Which makes sense also what you mentioned earlier about the ship deploying without any senior officers because they were at home.
So that also means that most of the people who died were 17 and 18 years
Golly.
old.
I assume at this time
Uh,
it's I mean, most of the military, especially in the Navy, I assume were male, right? So the breakdown. pers-
for the for the combatant roles, yes, they were predominantly male.
Right.
They were all male. Women did not serve aboard ships during this time. You would find that women who were in the Navy more than likely at places like
Okay.
hospitals, serving as nurses, things of that nature.
Okay. Yeah, I imagine they wouldn't have been on the ships during the attack.
Not unless they were visiting their husbands.
Okay.
So some of the civilians that were casualties. Some of the notable ones are 9 Honolulu Fire Department firefighters who responded to Hickam Field during the bombing. They became the only fire department members on American soil to be attacked by a foreign power in history.
Wow. Yeah.
Um, Fireman Harry Tuck Lee Pang of Engine 6 was killed near the hangars by machine gun fire from a Japanese plane. Captains Thomas Macy and John Carrera of Engine 4 and Engine 1 died while battling flames inside the hangar after a Japanese bomb crashed through the
Ooh.
roof. and 6 others were wounded by Japanese shrapnel. They were actually given Purple Hearts
That's cool. I mean, justifiably
because of
so.
their actions. So this made the 9 men the only non-military firefighters to receive a award, military award in American history.
I was gonna say, what about the firefighters on 9/11? But that wasn't necessarily a military conflict. So, yeah, that makes sense.
Now, that was a
Right.
terrorist attack perpetrated on civilians.
Yes. Not a
But don't worry, those guys did get awards. Firefighters have, their own award
okay.
structure.
No, I mean, I had never heard of these firefighters and what the sacrifice they did. Imagine you're called to a fire at an airfield during a surprise attack. Wave after wave of a Japanese plane is coming, and you show up and do your best to put out the fire. That's real gallantry.
Yes, yes, it is. So the Nevada attempted to exit the harbor. She was targeted by Japanese bombers as she got underway and sustained hits from 250-pound bombs, which set her ablaze. They beached her to avoid risking the harbor entrance if she sank there. The California was hit by 2 bombs and 2 torpedoes. The crew could have kept her afloat, possibly, but they were ordered to abandon ship just as they were raising power up for the pumps.
So, with an abandoned ship, I want to ask a few questions about that, as you are an experienced Navy man. Um, if you get the call for an abandoned ship, you just jump off the side, or what is the deal?
Yeah, you abandon ship, you get the heck off. You grab your personal flotation device, which if you're at general quarters, you should already
Okay,
have on you,
and
and you jump.
that's like a 40-foot drop, or what are we talking about?
It depends on the boat. It depends on how much damage the boat sustained if it's going under.
That wow.
So if you're abandoning, say, an aircraft carrier, what you do is you go up to the hangar bay and you jump from the elevator in the lower
Okay, so
position.
it's closer to the water, but still,
And that's going to be a good, yeah, that's the lowest point which you're going to be able to evacuate from the boat.
but that's still quite a distance.
So that's probably be more in the, yeah, that's going to be more in the line of like a
Oh,
40-foot drop.
that's okay.
With battleships and destroyers, you're only looking, at like maybe 10
That
feet,
seems more reasonable. Oof.
if that. Yeah, well, you're trained on how to abandon ship
Yeah,
during
I
basic training.
imagine that's so. The California gets the call. Get off the boat. Ew.
Burning oil from the Arizona and West Virginia drifted down towards the
Yeah.
California, and they were like, we got to get out of here, guys. There was the Utah, which was actually disarmed because they were going to use her as a target ship. She got hit twice by torpedoes. So, yay to waste those torpedoes. The West Virginia was hit by 7 torpedoes. The 7th one tore away her rudder. The Oklahoma was hit by 4 torpedoes. The last 2 were above her belt armor, and that caused her to
Ooh.
capsize. The Maryland, who was hit by 2 converted 16-inch shells, but neither of them caused any real serious damage. Those are just the battleship damages. They did not just hit battleships, they also hit lighter vessels.
Oh yeah.
The light cruiser Helena was torpedoed, and the concussion from the blast capsized the mine layer Olga.
That's a good name for a mine
2
layer.
destroyers in dry dock.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Two destroyers that were in dry dock, the Cassin and the Downs, were destroyed when bombs penetrated their fuel
Aye.
bunkers. The fuel caught fire, flooding the dry dock in an effort to, and the effort to fight the fire made the burning oil rise, and both of them got burned out. The Cassin slipped from her keel blocks and rolled against the Downs, which obviously did not help
Yeah.
the situation. The light cruiser, the Raleigh, was hit by a torpedo. The light cruiser Honolulu was damaged, but was able to remain in service. The Vostell, which was moored alongside the Arizona and was a repair vessel, was heavily damaged. The seaplane tender Curtis was damaged, and the destroyer Shaw was badly damaged when two bombs penetrated her forward magazine. The U.S. had 402 aircraft in Hawaii, 188 were destroyed, and 159 were damaged. 155 of them on the ground.
Golly.
Just about no aircraft were ready to take off to defend the any of the bases, but 8 Army Air Force pilots were able to get airborne during the attack, and 6 were credited with downing at least one Japanese aircraft during
Wow.
the attack.
That is impressive.
33 of the Constellated PBY Catalinas 30 of them were destroyed. 3 were on patrol at the time of the attack and were able to get back undamaged. Unfortunately, friendly fire did bring down some American planes, including 4 from the flight from the Enterprise. So at the time of the attack, 9 civilian aircraft were flying near Pearl Harbor. Of these, 3 of them were shot down.
Oh my gosh. What horrible luck.
All right. Yeah. All right. So we're going to leave it there for today. Next time, we're going to get into the Japanese losses, talking about the third wave
I
that
was going to
never
ask.
happened.
I'm so glad we're going to talk about that.
So at the end of our episodes, we like to honor one of our fallen heroes with the help of HeroCards.us. And today we are going to honor Staff Sergeant Clifford C. Sims. His hometown was Jacksonville, Florida. He served in the U.S. Army, 101st Airborne Division, 2nd Battalion, 501st Infantry D Company. He received the Medal of Honor, Purple Heart, Vietnam Gallantry Cross. His date of sacrifice was February 28, 1968, killed in action near Hue, Vietnam. He was 25. An orphan who grew up homeless, Sims was leading his squad and heard a booby trap trigger. Yelling for his soldiers to get back, he threw himself on the device, taking the full impact of the blast. Sims is also credited with saving his company's 1st platoon and headquarters earlier that same day. In an eyewitness statement supporting a Medal of Honor application for Sims, his commander, 1st Lieutenant Cleo Hogan, wrote, quote, Sims saved the lives of at least 3 of his squad and 2 of the company headquarters by absorbing the shock of the blast himself. Staff Sergeant Sims made the greatest sacrifice a soldier can make, and no mark of tribute can be too great. His Medal of Honor citation reads, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity, in action at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty, Staff Sergeant Sims distinguished himself while serving as a squad leader with Company D. Company D was assaulting a heavily fortified enemy position concealed within a dense wooded area when it encountered strong enemy defensive fire. Once within the wood line, Staff Sergeant Sims led his squad in a ferocious attack against an enemy force which had it pinned down, the 1st platoon, and threatened to overrun it. His skillful leadership provided the platoon with freedom of movement and enabled it to regain the initiative. Staff Sergeant Sims was then ordered to move his squad to a position where he could provide covering fire for the company command group and link up with the 3rd platoon, which was under heavy enemy pressure. After moving no more than 30 meters, Staff Sergeant Sims noticed that a brick structure in which ammunition was stocked was on fire. Realizing the danger, Staff Sergeant Sims took immediate action and moved his squad from the position. Though in the process of leaving the area, 2 members of the squad were injured by the subsequent explosion of the ammunition. Staff Sergeant Sims' prompt actions undoubtedly prevented more serious casualties from occurring. While continuing through the dense woods amidst heavy enemy fire, Staff Sergeant Sims and his squad were approaching a bunker when they heard an unmistakable noise of a concealed booby
Yeah.
trap being triggered immediately to their front. Staff Sergeant Sims warned his comrades of the danger and unhesitantly hurled himself upon the device as it exploded, taking the full impact of the blast. In so protecting his fellow soldiers, he willingly sacrificed his life. Staff Sergeant Sims' extraordinary heroism at the cost of his life is with keeping with the highest traditions of the military service and reflect great credit upon himself and the U.S. Army. So, Staff Sergeant Clifford C. Sims, we thank
Thank
you.
you.
All right, Expo, take
All
us
right,
out.
man. Or sir, excuse me. I don't mean to throw so casual a term at you. Anyway, listener, thank you so much for joining us, listening to part of our history and some of the details that you may have not heard before. If you ever want to reach out to us, there's a couple of ways you can do that. So, for example, if you've served on multiple ships and the general quarters klaxon is different, we would love to know. And you can let us know in a number of ways. So, one, you can email us. The email address is US Navy History Podcast at gmail.com. We are also on x.com or twitter.com. They go to the same place. The handle is USN, as in Nancy, or Navy, I should say, USN History Pod. And if you go to the show notes, you can see that we have a Discord server where there's a more interactive feature. You can join our Discord. We could talk about it. One thing I don't usually mention, but is also in the show notes, is the hero cards. So every time Dale talks about somebody that is showcased in one of the hero cards, you can access these also. You can learn more about some of the heroes that fell and what they did that was so gallant. And as always, please feel free to rate, review, share, let other people know how much you love this show, and then they might like it too. So thanks.
And with that, we're going to wish you guys fair winds and following seas.
Take care.
Bye.